Oh, oh, check it out.
All right, guys. Welcome to the Social Studies Judincast, episode 3 for Social Studies 20-1. This is going to be a short episode, relatively, compared to the previous two, which were quite long. Hopefully, it will not normally be that long. This one will definitely be shorter. So let's get started. So, of course, the main focus for this chapter, which is chapter 5, and of this unit, which I call Unit 2, which just includes Chapter 5, is national interests. You need to understand what national interests are and what are the different types of national interests. First of all, so we've talked about the three national interests, one being economic prosperity, that countries do things because it provides economic benefit. Number 2, safety and security. Countries do things because it provides security and safety for their citizens. And number 3, beliefs and values. Countries will do things because it aligns with their beliefs and values. And you can apply national interest to foreign policy, so interactions with other countries, or domestic policy. Both fall in line with national interest. And we looked at World War One and even the Berlin Conference preceding that, and those are great examples of countries pursuing their national interests. And the pursuit of those national interests leads to the Berlin Conference, and it leads to the outbreak of World War One as well, that countries deemed it necessary to engage in war in order to preserve their national interests. And you saw at the end of World War One, with the Paris Peace Conference, the Treaty of Versailles, with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, that wrapped up in all these agreements was the pursuit of national interests. Whether you're France and Britain and you wanted to punish Germany, or you're France and Britain and you wanted to occupy the Middle East instead of giving it to the Arabs that create their own states, or the United States that had different ideas on how to create long-lasting peace. Those post-war peace agreements are closely wrapped up with national interest. So there's 2 more case studies in this chapter on national interest, and they're a lot smaller than World War One. We're going to look at Afghanistan today. The next one will be Iraq. So let's look at Afghanistan. So this is the second case study of national interest, first being World War One. We're 80 years in the future here, different geographical area, but we're going to look at it through the lens of national interests. So where is Afghanistan? Afghanistan is here. Afghanistan, generally considered part of the Middle East, the far eastern part of the Middle East. Afghanistan borders Iran, Pakistan. Down here, of course, is India. Over here is Iraq, Syria. So when we're talking about Afghanistan, just to give you kind of some geographical context, this is Afghanistan. Zoom in, you can see all of its Stan brothers, the brothers, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, the Stan boys. Afghanistan's a landlocked country. It's not a wealthy country. It does not have great oil wealth like Iran, Iraq, other parts of the Middle East. It's a very tribal society. The predominant religion is Islam. It's being a place which is being conquered by many different empires over time. It's at the crossroads in Asia. It's been wrapped up in a lot of important historical events, actually, because of its geographical location. Alexander the Great Greek conqueror from 2,300 years ago, even conquered Afghanistan. So how does Afghanistan apply to national interest? Let's take a look. So everyone probably knows this event. And that's 9/11. And this would be before your time, before you were born. 9/11, so September 11th, 2001. I was actually in high school when this happened. So it's something that's forever ingrained in my memory. as one of the most significant events of my youth, and it certainly shaped the next 20 years of foreign policy of many different countries. And again, it's closely tied to the idea of national interest. So the 9/11 attacks took place primarily in the United States. Killed 2,982 people. 24 Canadians were killed in the process, and they were ultimately a terrorist attack on American soil, led by a terrorist group known as Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda was led by Osama bin Laden. They launched a terrorist attack on the Twin Towers of New York, the Pentagon, and they had a plane destined for the White House as well, although that flight was famously taken down by the passengers once they got wind of what was happening. There's even a movie that was made about it. And that movie is actually called Flight 93. So Al Qaeda launches terrorist attack against the United States, and there's a number of reasons why they targeted the United. Al Qaeda really considers this a holy war against the United States, against Western civilization, of which, of course, the United States is symbolically the most powerful at this time in history. Al Qaeda would cite Western and American intervention in Middle Eastern countries, and the disruption that caused as reasons for why they targeted the United States. So why does Afghanistan get invaded when it's just this terrorist group known as Al Qaeda? And the majority of the terrorist attackers were actually from Saudi Arabia. The vast majority of them, I think, like almost 90-something% of them were Saudi citizens. Osama bin Laden was also a Saudi citizen. Why did the Americans ultimately invade Afghanistan after they were attacked from 9/11? The reason why Afghanistan was targeted was because Al Qaeda was at this point largely based in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, had overthrown their communist government, and a group came to power known as the Taliban. And the Taliban had a very extremist interpretation of Islam. They were very reactionary, very conservative, very oppressive in terms of human rights. But they were very welcoming to terrorist groups that wanted to target the West. So the Taliban, who by 2001 were ruling over Afghanistan, were willing to give safe harbor to Al Qaeda. And the United States knew this. So in retaliation for the attacks on American soil, the United States and its allies invade Afghanistan. And Al Qaeda, they did not hide the fact that they carried out this attack. They actually claimed responsibility for the attack. So the Americans want to go get Al Qaeda. Where is Al Qaeda mostly located? They're located in Afghanistan. So American and its allies invade Afghanistan after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And the United Nations consider this a legal invasion. They agreed that the United States and its NATO allies were entitled to invade Afghanistan and destroy the Taliban and track down Osama bin Laden and retribution for the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and ultimately to limit the potential for Al Qaeda to carry out future attacks of this nature. So, what is the national interest in invading Afghanistan? Because this is our main focus, of course, for this chapter and this unit. United States foreign policy is based on safety and security and beliefs and values. These are the two major motives of foreign policy for the United States in this invasion. Number one, safety and security. They want to eliminate the headquarters for Al Qaeda. They want to topple the Taliban, which is the government of Afghanistan, and supported Al Qaeda. And the Taliban was, as I said, most people would consider it an oppressive state that probably should be removed anyways, according to many people. So the national interest, first of all, is to provide safety and security for American citizens. That we got to stop Al Qaeda from carrying out future terrorist attacks, and we got to stop the Taliban from harboring terrorists. So we need to go into Afghanistan and we need to take them out. Number two, there is a national interest in terms of beliefs and values, spreading democracy, spreading Western values to Afghanistan, spreading an idea of liberal rights and freedoms, and that if Afghanistan can embrace these ideas, they can be a friendly actor on the world stage, rather than be led by an extremist organization that's friendly towards terrorist groups. So these are the two main national interests in the invasion of Afghanistan. Notably absent is economic prosperity, right? The United States did not go into Afghanistan for oil. Afghanistan is not a oil-rich country. The United States spent vast amounts of money, over $1 trillion, in the invasion of Afghanistan. They did not go in there necessarily for economic gains, although some people would suggest that there were American weapons contractors that maybe benefited from it, but generally these are the two main reasons, not for economic reasons. So Canada, we joined in the invasion of Afghanistan. We lost lives in the invasion of Afghanistan. And the reason why we joined, well, of course, we have a close and friendly relationship with the United States, but our foreign policy is being closely based around NATO. NATO is a international, it's an organization. The acronym is for North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it was created in 1949 in the middle of the Cold War. And the Cold War was a period where it was a bipolar world. It was the United States against the Soviet Union and their allies. In Canada, naturally aligned with the United States during the Cold War because we had a similar political system of democracy, economic system of capitalism. So we're natural allies. And NATO exists even till this day. So the Cold War ended in 1991, but NATO still exists. And there's a clause in NATO that says that if one member is attacked, it would be considered an attack on all. And this existed during the Cold War as well. It was a policy of deterrence that you don't want to attack one country because then you're going to have to fight with everybody. So the 9/11 terrorist attacks were considered an attack on American soil. And the Americans enacted the clause within the NATO treaty agreement that compelled the rest of NATO countries to come to its aid. So that included Germany, Britain, Canada, etc. So as a result, forces from Canada and other countries went to Afghanistan under the NATO banner to remove the Taliban, hunt down Al Qaeda, and ultimately create some stability in that country. So what to do in Afghanistan? So the fighting drags on. Yes, the Afghanistan government is toppled in a matter of days. The Taliban has no chance. But the Taliban actually still exists to this day. And they turn to guerrilla tactics. Many of them hide out in the mountains. Al Qaeda as well is under attack from the Americans, but they also turn to guerrilla tactics. They prove to be very difficult to actually entirely eliminate. So the fighting drags on, and it doesn't really end. There's still conflict in Afghanistan to this day. Canada and its NATO allies, they realize that there must be a greater emphasis on creating a democratic, self-sufficient society in Afghanistan. So they come to the realization they can't just go in, knock out the Taliban, hunt down Al Qaeda, and hope that Afghanistan's going to turn into this democratic country that's stable with rights and freedoms and is friendly towards other countries. It's not possible. They have to actually nation build in Afghanistan if we're going to have a country that is stable. So in addition to making the country more secure, this meant helping Afghans rebuild their economy, develop their political process, so develop that political system. How does it actually work? Right? You can't just embrace democracy over time. It takes development. develop medical facilities, develop their armed forces, their police, so that the Afghanistan government itself can combat Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups. But ultimately, these goals proved difficult to achieve as the Taliban put up resistance that I mentioned continues to this day. But if you look at Afghanistan today, it is a democratic country with rights and freedoms, more rights and freedoms than existed under the Taliban. So there are some successes in Afghanistan, but it was a long, hard process that took a lot of money and, most importantly, a lot of lives on both sides to get to that point. So there's a long-standing debate over Afghanistan, and it revolves around a number of issues. Number one, the validity of Canada's mission. To what extent should we be involved in there? What are we fighting for? Is it a valid cause? The financial cost of the mission. It's not cheap to send troops over there, to arm troops, to build hospitals, to help in the development of infrastructure. The combat role of Canadian forces. Should we be on the front lines fighting, or should we take different roles in terms of humanitarian aid? The threat to the lives of Canadian forces. If you recall the map earlier where Afghanistan is, right? So many people argued, is it in our national interest to be sacrificing Canadian lives way over there in the Middle East? And the length of the mission. This has been a long-standing debate. When does it end? How do we know that it's ended? How much time is too much time? But you also have to be careful. If you leave too early, was it all for nothing? So largely, all of these coalition troops have left. Afghanistan's a relatively stable country today. You know, that I don't want to call it fully stable. There is civil conflict. There's terrorist attacks within it. There's groups that certainly within Afghanistan want to disrupt the government, but it does have an element of stability. But there was, over the period of 15 years after the invasion of Afghanistan, a debate on all of these issues in terms of Afghanistan. So that's it for this Judincast today. The next case study we're going to look at is Iraq, which is another good example of countries pursuing their national interests. So what I want you to do is just follow the instructions on the Google Classroom for today, and I will talk to you guys later. Take care.